Hey, this is Alex with Grow How. Today I was on the Facebook feed, and in response to somebody's question about weeds in the lawn, another gentleman posted something maintaining that all herbicides kill bees. Uh, the reactions to that were normal. Um, you know, it's not herbicides that kill insects, it's insecticides that kill insects. And that's a good argument. Now, I do understand where that argument's coming from, that herbicides kill bees, because bees feed on the flowers of plants and a few other parts on plants, but primarily the flowers. And if you don't have those around, then the bees don't have sufficient nutrition. But I've got to say, to say that it kills them, um, that's actually pretty over the top, because to have what's considered in America a nice lawn with no other plants in there, you can do that without an insecticide, but you're still doing the same thing to the bees. You're denying them a food source, which isn't necessarily going to kill them. Beekeepers are going to give their bees supplemental feed of sugar. Um, Even native bees, given what we do on our landscapes, we have very unfriendly landscapes for these bees to live in, let alone to go eat in. And the other thing too is there's ways to negate this if you insist. Now, I have to be upfront here. I'm not a part of the dandelion brigade that thinks dandelions are God's gift to the earth, okay? I know bees use them. Bees in my area would prefer a good fruit tree. But I do have dandelions on my lawn. It's because it's not important enough for me to go to battle with them to get rid of them. They're just not that big a deal. So I had to have that disclosure. But back to the subject of whether herbicides, chemicals that kill plants, I think it's a little bit ridiculous to claim that, even though it's one of the extension agencies that it's being claimed for. Now, I didn't go study this as deeply as maybe I should have. As a horticulturist and at times beekeeper, I don't have bees right now, but that hopefully will change before the end of the season. I find that this general assertion, it really just is ridiculous and it's misleading. I would rather focus on, rather than saying, oh, we need to have weeds for bees, a lot of the weeds that we commonly have really aren't that good for bees. There's some that are decent. Asters. In my neck of the woods, a native plant by the name of rubber rabbit brush is really good for bees. Clover, of course, is good for bees. That's considered a weed, I guess. I don't consider it such. But there's a few of these weeds that really make a difference, and I would argue that clover is probably the most important of these, partially because of the bloom time, partially because of the quality of not just the nectar. Nectar is fairly standard across most plants that bees will feed off of, but because the pollen is particularly nutritious. But again, you go back to it, and would it be better to have a lawn full of dandelions, or would it be better to reduce the size of the lawn and have a wide variety of different plants to feed them? Agastache, Nepeta, catmint, ornamental sage, culinary sage, Salvia officinalis. All those are probably going to do a lot better for feeding your bees than most of the weeds in your lawn, and I would even argue better than dandelions. Clover is a really good bee feed, and it's actually really good for your lawn, so you can go figure that one out, why people don't like it. And so I would rather see these multitude of different plants put in. I would rather see the lawn size reduced or gotten rid of than to go preaching against weed killers. Again, I use them. I use them in my lawn. I take that back. I've got some white top. It's a state noxious weed. I have to get rid of it, or at least try and get rid of it by law. And I'd rather not have that much white top. There's more interesting plants I'd rather have. But for the most part, I don't spray my lawn. I'm not in that big a mood to just annihilate everything and to fight this battle of, you know, genetic superiority or whatever. I don't even know what to call it. It's not worth that fight for me. But again, to say that this is, this is killing the bees, I'm going to have to say it's not true, because that's not how beekeeping works. That's not how bees work, and that's not how horticulture works. So let's rather look at the more what can I do. First of all, I can stop being so uptight about my lawn. There is no reason that actually makes logical sense other than an aesthetic preference that we have been taught. It's not genetic, folks. We've been taught that solo turf grass has to be the way to go. For decades, I've preferred clover on my grass. I've known since at least high school that clover used to be planted with grass mixes. And this happened before my life before I was born, but it still is a significant and intelligent way of doing things. It's a thought out way of doing things, and I'd rather see that happening. So we don't need monoculture lawns. That's just, again, there is really no advantage of them other than something we have been trained to do, that we've been told that it has to be this way for no particularly good reason, just that it has to be this way. So we need to get rid of monocultures. We need to look at, if we are going to have a monoculture, or even if we're going to have a piece of lawn, we need to look at how much lawn do I need. Here in the West, things are dry as heck, even though this has been a wet year. We're into the dry season now. Lawns suffer. Lawns need a lot of water. You can probably hear in the background my neighbor is overwatering her lawn. They just turned on, but I've already got stuff that's headed towards the drain. I can see it from here. That lawn's too wet. So we can plant other things that don't require as much water. And honestly, flowers, perennial flowers, echinacea. I mentioned a bunch of the other bee plants that I like. Yarrow is not great for honeybees. Never seen a honeybee stop for more than the briefest moment to check out yarrow. They've never had time to feed off of it, but they're great for the native bees. Yarrow is a native plant here. Even the non-native varieties are still going to be an improvement over expanses of lawn. So planting flowers, increasing the size of our flower beds, making them perennial, and choosing things that are going to be a little bit more friendly to bees, honeybees, native bees, and other pollinators. And to me that just kind of makes sense, because I like the flowers. I've always liked the flowers. I've never really liked lawn. I like blooming things. Tree planting. Now, I'm in a neighborhood here. This house is 40 years old. The neighborhood across the street's got, at least another 10 years on that. This is an established neighborhood. We've got some decent trees, but they're older trees. Maple across the ways, gosh, got to be at least 50 plus years old. My maples, again, about 40 years old. Notice 2 maples there. Planting diversity. As much as I love the clover on my lawn, I don't think that's the only thing I want to plant for the pollinators. Pollinators will do better with a good variety and a good diversity. I think clover is a good base for it. It's a good place to start. If you're going to do one thing for the bees, throw some clover in your lawn. That's a good move. But I think other things need to be planted. So, get rid of the monoculture in the lawn. No need for it. Plant more flowers around the lawn. Cut down on the size of the lawn. to me, that's beautification. Lots of variety and diversity. Even though I've got my favorite bee plants, you'll always see me sticking another perennial in there that's not necessarily going to be as good for the honeybees, perhaps not even as good necessarily for the native bees, but you might see some really small wasps visiting it. And so, that mixing it up makes a difference. Yeah, tree crops. I mentioned the trees earlier here. Maple. When I've got a beehive close enough, that thing's covered in the spring. You look at the apple trees in the neighborhood, they're covered in the spring, if there's enough bees around. A lot of times there's not enough bees around. And so, tree crops. I'm looking across the street, neighbors there behind the lady that's watering. They've got this nice linden tree. It's about 15, 20 feet high. And I can tell you, when that's in bloom, if there are bees in the neighborhood, they're going to cover that. Very good quality food for the bees, very prolific food for the bees during its time period. It's only going to bloom for about 2 weeks. My maple's only going to bloom for about 2 weeks. So having a diversity of different varieties, but also different species of your trees. Again, this links back into the variety. But trees are really good bee food, but then again, they tucker out about mid-June. Yeah, mid-June to mid-July. Then they're pretty well done blooming. And so, then that's the other thing, is you have to plant for different seasons. It's great that you've got spring flowers. A lot of people have spring flowers. I'll be honest, for my bees, I tend to look for late summer to fall flowers, especially the late summer that we are going into now in the middle of July here. There's a lot less that, go find a dandelion in my lawn that's actually blooming right now. I was over at my father-in-law's, he's got 5 acres. There's not a dandelion blooming there. But the clover still is. The geraniums I planted for him, perennial geraniums, are still blooming. The echinacea is starting to bloom. So those things are really important because there's not as much bee food around this time of year. So you look at it, get rid of the monocultures, reduce the size of the lawn, and plant flowers, get lots of variety, and use tree crops to feed the bees, especially spring to very, very early summer. Those are really key things, and it's more important to do those than to tell people don't use herbicides. Again, I guess herbicides are getting rid of all the clover and stuff, and I get that. But I think the negativity and the negative message, because there are places to use herbicides, there are places where they're beneficial, and places where they're taking out flowers that bees aren't touching, or plants that simply aren't even flowering plants, at least not in the sense of needing animal pollination. Like all my grasses that are weedy around here. Cheatgrass over there is going crazy. And I'm use Roundup on that. Once I get it under control, guess what? I won't have to use glyphosate anymore. So anyway, there's your thought. In the comments below, talk to me about what you think. Just make sure it's respectful. We don't need to agree, but we should be respectful for each other's opinions and experiences. And if you like this video, go ahead, please subscribe. It'd be much appreciated, and it'll help me build the channel and get to more people who I think are looking for this kind of information. Thank you very much. Manana.